The night sky over Vareth City was alive with thunder. Purple lightning cracked through dark clouds, painting the metal buildings with brief flashes of light. Acid rain hissed as it struck the roofs and glass streets. Most people had already gone inside, locking their doors and dimming their lights. Only one figure moved through the storm, a bulky human named Mason Hale. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and covered in mud. His jacket, once military gray, was now torn and soaked. He had been walking for hours, searching for a place to stay. The storm had started right after his cargo ship crashed outside the city walls. He'd barely escaped the wreck with a small survival pack and his tools. His hands were bruised from climbing through the wreckage, but he didn't complain. He had been through worse, far worse. Mason's heavy boots splashed through puddles that glowed faint blue under the neon lights. The city was alien to him, full of strange shapes, tall buildings made of smooth glass metal, and roads that hummed with magnetic energy. He'd been on many worlds before, but never one like Vareth. Here, humans were rare. Most people looked at him with wide eyes, whispering and stepping aside when they saw his size. He didn't blame them. He stopped at the door of a small inn. A bright sign above it read, "Vacancy." He knocked once, then again. The door opened a crack and a short, green-skinned alien peered out. Its voice was sharp. "No humans, go." Then the door slammed shut. Mason sighed. He had tried 5 places already. None of them wanted him. His body was strong, but even he could feel the cold now. He tightened his coat and walked on. The wind grew louder, pushing sheets of purple rain across the street. Somewhere above, a transport ship roared past, spraying mist and heat from its engines. After another long walk, Mason reached the edge of the city, a quiet district full of old homes and empty shops. Most windows were dark. Only one building had light, a narrow 2-story home with a soft blue glow at the door. The sign said Iliara's Habitat 6. He hesitated. It didn't look like a place for guests. It looked like someone's home, but he had no choice left. He stepped up to the door and knocked gently. After a moment, the door opened. A woman stood there, not human, but close enough that Mason blinked in surprise. Her skin was pale silver and her hair shimmered like moonlight. Her eyes were bright violet, deep and alert. She looked at him from head to toe, her expression cautious but calm. "You're lost," she said softly. Her voice had a musical tone. "Just need a place to stay," Mason replied. "Till the storm passes." She looked past him, scanning the dark street. Distant sirens echoed somewhere. The woman bit her lip, thinking. Then she said something that made him raise an eyebrow. "It'll be a tight squeeze," she said, "but come in." Mason ducked under the small doorframe and stepped inside. The room was warm but tiny. Everything seemed built for smaller bodies. He could barely stand without brushing the ceiling. The furniture creaked under his weight. A small heater hummed in the corner, spreading soft light. Iliara closed the door and locked it. "You're human," she said quietly. "That's unusual here." "Yeah," Mason replied. "I noticed." He wiped the rain from his beard and looked around. The room smelled faintly of herbs and oil. There were small pictures on the wall, children maybe, and shelves filled with strange glowing stones. She motioned for him to sit, but when he tried, the chair groaned loudly. She laughed softly. "Told you it'd be a tight squeeze." For the first time in days, Mason almost smiled. "Yeah, guess you weren't kidding." She poured him a drink that smoked blue and handed it to him. "This should help with the cold." He took a careful sip. It burned his throat but warmed his chest. For a few quiet minutes they said nothing. Outside, thunder rolled again. Then Mason noticed something and faint marks on the floor like burns. The walls had been patched recently, and several locks had been added to the windows. He frowned. "You live alone?" Her hand paused over her cup. "Mostly," she said. Why, he didn't answer. He could tell she was hiding something just as he was. The lights flickered. For a moment, the hum of the heater faded. Mason looked toward the door. Through the narrow gap in the curtains, he saw movement, small red lights floating outside. "Patrol drones," Iliara stood, tense. "Stay away from the windows," she whispered. Mason's instincts sharpened instantly. "They looking for someone?" Her eyes met his. "Yes," she said. "And if they see you here, we're both in danger." The storm raged harder outside. The wind screamed. And in that small, dim room, the bulky human and the alien woman stood frozen. Both strangers. Both with secrets, as red lights flashed closer through the rain. Mason woke to the soft hum of the heater and the smell of something warm cooking. For a moment he forgot where he was. Then the small ceiling above him reminded him fast he wasn't in his ship or on Earth. He was in a stranger's home, on a world that barely tolerated his kind. He sat up slowly, bumping his head on a hanging lamp. "Ow," he muttered. The room was still too small for him, his knees hitting the low table as he tried to stand. His heavy boots left marks on the metal floor. Everything here was made for smaller bodies, delicate, precise, and breakable. He felt like a bear in a birdcage. From the other room, Eliara's voice came softly. "You're awake, human." He stepped through a narrow doorway and saw her standing by a small cooking unit. Steam rose from a silver pot, filling the air with the scent of something sweet and sharp. She wore a long robe now, her silver hair tied loosely behind her neck. Her movements were careful, practiced, but Mason noticed how her hands shook slightly when she poured 2 cups. "Call me Mason," he said. "And you?" "Eliara," she replied, handing him a cup. "It's morning root tea. It might taste strange." He took a sip. It was bitter but warm. "Thanks," he said, "for letting me stay." Her eyes flickered toward the window. "You didn't leave me much choice," she murmured. "Those patrols last night, they were searching for something. Or someone. Humans aren't common here. You could have brought trouble to my door." Mason nodded. "Wouldn't be the first time." He turned his gaze toward the wall. Strange round symbols were carved there, glowing faint blue. They pulsed softly like living runes. The air in the room had a faint charge to it, something mechanical, something hidden. He frowned. "You do repairs?" "Looks like power conduits." Eliara hesitated, then nodded. "I fix things. I was an engineer once." "Before the council banned independent work." "The council?" Mason asked, leaning against the wall. The small table nearly collapsed under his arm. Her lips tightened. "They control everything. Energy, trade, even the kind of food we eat. And they don't like people who hide things from them." Mason heard the warning tone in her voice. He didn't push further. "Well," he said quietly, "I'm not planning to stay long. Just until I find transport back to the docks." She laughed bitterly. "Transport?" "The docks are sealed. No one leaves without clearance. And you—" She looked him over, his massive shoulders and scarred hands. "You'd be noticed the second you stepped outside." Mason sighed. He hated being trapped. The walls felt closer now, the ceiling lower. Every movement made the small home creak. He shifted awkwardly, nearly knocking over a shelf filled with glowing stones. "Sorry," he muttered. Eliara smirked slightly. "It's fine. I did warn you about the size." Outside, the wind howled again, brushing dust against the metal walls. Through the blinds, Mason could see 2 patrol drones gliding by. Smooth, silent, their red lights scanning doorways. Eliara stiffened, lowering the curtains. "They never come this far into the district," she whispered. "Not unless—" She didn't finish. Mason watched her closely. Her voice trembled, not with fear for herself, but for someone else. He leaned closer. "Unless what?" Eliara finally looked up. Her violet eyes shimmered in the dim light. "Unless they're hunting," the word hung heavy between them. Mason's instincts kicked in again, the soldier's mind he had tried to bury. He glanced around the small home, noticing the subtle details he'd missed before. A reinforced hatch in the floor, extra power cables leading down, and what looked like ration containers stacked under a cloth. He stepped toward the hatch. "What's below?" Her voice sharpened instantly. "Don't," he froze, hands raised. "Just asking?" She sighed, her shoulders sinking. "There are things you don't want to know, Mason Hale." He looked at her, calm but firm. "You let me in during a storm. You knew I was human. You knew it was dangerous. That means you're already hiding something dangerous, too." For a long moment, they just stared at each other. 2 strangers, both cornered by secrets. Then, without another word, she walked to the door, double-locked it, and turned off the lights. The house fell into quiet darkness, lit only by the faint blue glow from the wall symbols. She whispered, "If they come again tonight, don't open the door. Don't look out the window. And whatever happens—" Her voice cracked slightly. "Don't go down there." Mason didn't reply. He sat back, the chair creaking under his weight, his eyes fixed on the hatch in the floor. Outside, the patrol drones drifted closer, their scanners sweeping across the street. Inside, Eliara blew out the final light and whispered to herself, "The storm brought him here for a reason. I just hope it's not too late." The night outside was silent except for the low hum of patrol drones. Inside Eliara's small home, the air felt heavy, like the calm before another storm. Mason sat in the dim light, his elbows resting on his knees, listening. Every sound mattered now. Every whisper of metal against metal. He hadn't slept. He couldn't. Something about the house was wrong. It wasn't just the extra locks or the burned marks near the door. It was what lay beneath his boots. A faint vibration ran through the floor, too steady to be random. It was a pulse, a rhythm, like a machine trying to stay quiet. He looked at the small hatch under the table again. Eliara had warned him not to go down there. But her warning had done the opposite. It had made him curious. He waited until her footsteps upstairs stopped. A door creaked. Then silence. She was asleep. Or pretending to be. Mason stood up carefully, the floor creaking under his weight. He bent down, brushed away a thin layer of dust, and placed his palm on the hatch. Warm. There was something running below. Something alive or powered. His hand found the latch and he opened it slowly. The hinges didn't make a sound. The air that rose was colder than the room, mixed with the faint scent of oil and something sweet like fruit. He grabbed a small flashlight from his belt, its soft beam cutting through the darkness below. The ladder creaked as he climbed down. At the bottom, Mason froze. The basement was much larger than he expected, an open chamber built from scrap metal lit by a few flickering lamps. And in the center were 3 small figures huddled together near a heating coil. Children. Alien children. They weren't like Eliara. Their skin was dull gray blue, marked with strange symbols that glowed faintly under the light. Their clothes were torn, their faces thin and tired. When they saw him, they gasped and backed away, whispering something in their own language. Mason lifted his hand slowly. "It's okay," he said quietly. "I'm not here to hurt you." One of the children, maybe 7 or 8 years old, stared up at him with wide eyes. "Titan," the child whispered. "He's a Titan," Mason frowned. "What did you call me?" The smallest one, trembling, pointed at his chest. "You're one of the warriors from the stories. The ones who fought the sky monsters. The big ones who could lift ships," he almost laughed. "Not anymore, kid." But before he could say more, a soft click echoed behind him. Eliara stood at the top of the stairs, her face pale in the light. "You weren't supposed to see this," she whispered. Mason turned slowly. "You could have told me." "I couldn't," she said, walking down, her eyes darting between him and the children. "If you had reported them, if the patrols found out, they would burn this place to the ground. Who are they?" Her voice softened. "They're the last of the Oryx children. The council wiped out their colony months ago. They said it was a containment measure. These 3 escaped before the soldiers arrived." Mason looked at the kids again. "So you've been hiding them here?" Eliara nodded. "Feeding them, teaching them, keeping them alive. But the drones are getting closer every night. They scan for energy signals. I've had to cut the power more and more." She swallowed hard. "That's why I didn't want you here. A human, a big one, would draw attention. They'd search the house." Mason stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You saved them. You did the right thing." Her eyes glimmered with sadness. "The right thing doesn't survive long under the council." He crouched, resting his hand on the floor. The hum he'd felt earlier was coming from a small generator hidden behind a crate. Handmade, old, patched with wires. It was weak but steady, barely enough to keep the kids warm. Mason stared at it for a moment, then looked up. "Your generator's leaking current. That's what the patrols are tracing." "I can fix it," Eliara blinked. "You can?" "Used to work engineering on the Sagan belt transports," he said simply. "I know a short circuit when I feel one." For the first time, her expression softened. "You'd risk helping me? After what you've seen?" He shrugged. "Those kids deserve a chance. Doesn't matter what planet they're from." As he knelt by the generator, tightening bolts and rewiring burned fuses, Eliara watched him quietly. The children huddled together, whispering. The smallest smiled for the first time in days. When the lights brightened slightly, Mason wiped his hands. "That'll keep the signal low," he said. "For now." Eliara exhaled deeply. "Thank you." He looked at her, serious now. "If the council finds this place, they'll kill you first. You need a plan." "I know," she said softly. "And now, so do you." Above them, the distant hum of a patrol ship grew louder, closer than before. Dust fell from the ceiling. The sound made all three children freeze. Mason looked up at Eliara. "They're sweeping the district." Her voice trembled. "Then it's already begun." The morning came with a low metallic hum that rattled Eliara's window panes. Mason woke instantly, his instincts sharp. The storm outside had cleared, but the air was thick with tension. From the narrow crack in the curtains, he saw them. 6 patrol crafts, silver and black, hovering above the sector like vultures circling a battlefield. He stood up fast, brushing the sleep from his eyes. "They're here," he said quietly. Eliara froze halfway through packing food rations into a small bag. "How many?" "Enough to make trouble," Mason said, his deep voice steady but grim. "They've sealed off the main road." The children huddled in the corner, silent and pale. The smallest one, Rin, clutched a worn blanket that was far too small for his frame. His big eyes glistened with fear. "Will they take us away again?" he whispered. Eliara knelt down, holding the child close. "Not if we're careful," she murmured. But Mason was already moving. His mind had switched into soldier mode, the mode he had promised himself he'd left behind years ago. He scanned the small home for anything that could be used as defense. The table, the chairs, a metal pipe by the heater. Nothing strong enough. Then his eyes fell on a heavy steel panel from the basement generator. He grabbed it, testing its weight. It would do. "Barricade the back door," he ordered calmly. Eliara blinked at his tone. It was the voice of a man who'd given commands before. "Who are you really, Mason?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her directly, his gray eyes cold but alive. Someone who's seen what these patrols do to families. Outside, a voice boomed from a loudspeaker. "Residents of Sector 9 remain in your homes. All unauthorized lifeforms will be detained." A low whine followed, the sound of drones powering up their scanners. Mason's jaw tightened. He turned to Eliara. "They're sweeping house by house. We've got 5 minutes, maybe less." Eliara rushed to hide the children under the floor hatch. "Stay quiet," she whispered to them. "No matter what happens, don't make a sound." The kids nodded, trembling. As she slid the hatch closed, Mason moved to the window. He could see the armored patrol team marching down the street, 5 soldiers in gray armor, masks glowing red. The lead one carried a scanner that buzzed faster when it pointed toward Eliara's house. Mason muttered, "They've got your energy signature." Eliara's breath hitched. "You said you fixed it." "I did," he said, grabbing the steel panel. "But I'm human. My bioscan will light up like a flare." The soldiers reached the door. A mechanical voice shouted, "Open in the name of the council." Eliara looked at Mason helplessly. "If you fight, they'll kill you." He smiled faintly. "They can try." The door burst open with a blast of compressed air. Smoke and debris filled the small room. The soldiers stepped inside, weapons raised. Mason lunged first. The steel panel swung like a hammer, smashing the lead soldier into the wall. The second fired a stun bolt, but Mason ducked, grabbing the man's arm and throwing him over the table. Sparks flew as another's weapon hit the floor. Eliara screamed, covering her mouth as plasma shots burned holes into her walls. Mason moved like a storm, silent, fast, powerful. He kicked the last soldier through the door, then swung the steel plate to block a drone's blast. The weapon exploded in a shower of light. For a brief moment, the street went silent again. Then, from the smoke, Mason stepped out, breathing heavily, armor dented and covered in dust. The patrol crafts above shifted position, scanning for heat. He turned to Eliara. "They've seen us. They'll send more." She looked around at the wrecked room, fear rising in her chest. "We can't stay here anymore." "No," Mason said, picking up a fallen energy rifle. "We can't." He walked to the hatch and lifted it open. "Get the kids. We move now." Eliara climbed down and gathered the frightened children. When they climbed back up, the house was already dim. Mason had shut off the power completely. Outside, alarms began to wail, deep and echoing, calling reinforcements. "Mason," Eliara whispered as they stepped into the alley behind the house. "You didn't have to do that. You could have run." He looked back once at the burning doorway, then down at the small children clutching her hands. "I told you before," he said quietly. "No one should live in cages." They hurried down the narrow passage, rain starting again above them. The city's glow turned red as searchlights swept the skies. Mason led the way, one child on his shoulder, his eyes fixed on the dark horizon. Behind them, The patrol commander radioed in a single, chilling message. Target confirmed. Human combatant. Level 9 threat. Capture or terminate on sight. And high above, the Council's control tower came alive with lights. Mason Hale's name flashed across their screens for the first time in years. A name from an old war the galaxy thought was over. The night swallowed them whole. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the alleyways into rivers of light and oil. The glow from patrol drones swept past rooftops as Mason, Eliara, and the 3 children hurried through the lower district, their boots splashing through puddles that smelled like metal. Mason carried the smallest child in one arm, his other hand gripping a stolen energy rifle. Every few seconds he stopped, scanned the sky, and listened. His breathing was steady and trained. Eliara struggled to keep up, clutching the other 2 children close, her silver hair plastered to her face. "Where are we going?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Out of the city," Mason said. "We head for the cliffs." "The cliffs?" Eliara gasped. "That's suicide. The wind currents alone." "Better than a council prison," he said. His tone left no room for debate. They moved through a maze of half-collapsed tunnels where the walls were scarred from old wars. Mason's boots crunched on broken glass and rusted steel. Every so often, faint graffiti glowed on the walls. Messages in alien script warning of patrol zones. The deeper they went, the older everything felt. The city above was bright and controlled, but down here it was wild. Forgotten. Finally, Mason stopped beside a steel gate that was half buried in dust. He knelt, pried open a control panel, and crossed 2 wires. Sparks jumped, and the gate hissed open with a heavy groan. The air beyond smelled of rain, wind, and freedom. Eliara stepped closer, her eyes wide. "You know how to do that?" Mason didn't answer right away. Used to work security doors on freighters. Same tech, different planet. They stepped out into the open plains beyond the city. The skyline of Vareth glowed behind them, towers like jagged teeth pulsing with red lights as search drones combed the night. In the distance, the cliffs shimmered under twin moons, tall and silver like walls of glass. The smallest child, Rin, looked up at the moons. "Are we safe now?" Mason shook his head. "Not yet, kid. Keep close." They walked for hours. The rain faded, replaced by cold wind that carried the faint scent of ash and ozone. The ground was uneven, littered with old shipwrecks and twisted machines, relics of a forgotten battle. Mason recognized the shape of an old drop pod half buried in sand. It had human markings. He paused, running his fingers across the faded emblem. "Terran Engineering Corps," he murmured. "Didn't think I'd ever see one of these again." Eliara watched him silently. There was something about the way he looked at that symbol, a mix of pride and sorrow. She realized then that Mason wasn't just a worker or wanderer. He was a soldier, a survivor of something terrible. They found shelter in the wreck of an old cargo hauler that had crashed decades ago. Mason climbed in first, checking for traps or wild creatures, then motioned the others inside. The metal walls creaked, but the roof held firm against the wind. Inside, Eliara started a small heat coil from her pack. Soft light filled the chamber. The children curled together, exhausted. Mason sat by the open hatch, his eyes never leaving the horizon. "You saved us," Eliara said quietly, sitting across from him. He shook his head. "I just bought time. They'll send more. The council doesn't stop." She studied his face, the scars along his jaw, the tired eyes that had seen too much. "You've fought them before, haven't you?" He hesitated, then nodded once. "Years ago. Different world. Same cruelty." Eliara lowered her gaze. "I didn't think humans were capable of mercy. The stories we hear, they call you destroyers." Mason's eyes softened. "Stories forget things, like why we fought, or who we tried to save." For a long moment, only the hum of the heater filled the silence. The storm outside had faded to a whisper. Rin stirred and murmured in his sleep. "Titan will protect us." Eliara smiled faintly. "They believe you're some kind of legend." Mason leaned back against the cold metal wall. "I'm no legend," he said softly. "Just someone who's tired of running." She looked at him for a long time, her expression unreadable. "Then stop running," she whispered. "Fight!" He didn't reply, but something flickered in his eyes, a spark that hadn't burned in years. He looked out toward the horizon again. The first light of dawn was creeping over the plains, painting the sky gold. "Rest while you can," he said. We move again when the sun's up. As Iliara settled beside the children, Mason stayed awake, rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the glowing skyline of Vareth. The storm had passed, but in his gut, he knew another one was coming. Somewhere beyond the cliffs. The Council's trackers were already recalibrating, searching for a heat signature that matched an extinct classification, human Titan-class combatant. And when they found him, Mason Hale would be ready. The sun rose cold and pale over the plains of Vareth. Dew clung to the broken hull of the old cargo hauler where Mason and the others had slept. From the outside, it looked like a forgotten piece of junk, rusted, dented, swallowed by time. But inside, tension pulsed like a heartbeat. Mason was the first to wake. His instincts never let him rest long. He crawled out of the wreckage quietly, scanning the horizon through the morning haze. The wind was still, too still. No birds, no hum of drones, and only silence. He didn't like silence. Iliara followed him out, wrapping her thin robe tighter around her shoulders. The silver sheen of her skin glowed faintly in the sunrise. "How far to the cliffs?" she asked softly. "Half a day if we move fast," Mason replied, still scanning the horizon. "But something's wrong. It's too quiet." Before she could answer, the ground trembled under their feet. A low mechanical roar filled the air. Mason looked up, and his stomach tightened. A gunship was descending from the clouds, sleek and black, engines howling. Its shadow swallowed the wreck like a storm. "Inside," he barked. Iliara grabbed the children and pushed them toward the back of the hauler. Mason sprinted to the opening, shielding them as the ship fired its landing thrusters. Dust and metal shards tore through the air. When the noise stopped, the world was eerily still again. Then came the sound of boots. Heavy, precise, in perfect rhythm. Mason peeked through a crack in the hull. A squad of council soldiers surrounded the wreck, their armor gleaming under the twin suns. The lead trooper raised a scanner. Thermal signatures confirmed. One adult human, multiple non-registered juveniles. Iliara's hands trembled. "They found us." Mason turned to her. "Take the kids and run when I say." "Don't argue," she shook her head. "You can't fight them all," he smiled faintly. "I've been told that before." The metal door burst open with a plasma charge, flooding the room with smoke and heat. Soldiers stormed in, shouting commands. Mason was already moving, a blur of muscle and instinct. He slammed the first soldier into the wall, grabbed his rifle, and fired back. Blue plasma streaked across the room, scorching the air. Iliara ducked low, shielding the children as Mason fought. He moved like a storm, fast, brutal, unstoppable. 2 soldiers went down before the others adjusted their aim. A bolt grazed his shoulder, searing through flesh, but he didn't stop. He grabbed a fallen soldier's shield and threw it, knocking another off his feet. But there were too many. A shock round hit him square in the chest, sending him crashing against the wall. His weapon fell from his hand. The soldiers rushed forward, slamming him to the ground, binding his wrists with glowing restraints. Iliara screamed, struggling against the soldier who grabbed her. "Let him go!" "He's human. He's not your enemy." The commander, a tall alien with dark armor and a face like stone, stepped forward. "Every human is the Council's enemy," he said coldly. He turned to Mason. "You've caused enough damage, Titan." Mason looked up, breathing hard, blood trickling down his temple. "You talk too much." The commander struck him across the face with the butt of his rifle. "Your kind destroyed half the galaxy's order. You think we've forgotten?" Mason spat blood onto the floor. "You'll wish you had." Before the commander could respond, Iliara threw herself forward, striking him with her bare hands. The blow barely moved him, but it distracted the soldiers long enough for Mason to twist free. He broke the restraints like they were paper, grabbed the commander's wrist, and slammed him into the wall. Plasma bolts filled the air again. The children screamed. Iliara grabbed them, dragging them through a narrow service hatch. "Mason, come!" she shouted, but Mason didn't move. He turned, firing the commander's rifle until it overheated. The walls burned with white-hot light. "Go," he roared. "I'll hold them." Iliara hesitated, then nodded once, tears in her eyes. She vanished into the smoke with the children. Moments later, the gunship's cannons lit up the wreckage. The explosion shook the ground for miles. When the smoke cleared, all that remained was scorched metal and silence. The commander limped through the wreck, scanning the debris. "Target neutralized," he said into his comm. Human Titan confirmed terminated. He turned back toward his men. "Recover the fugitives. The woman won't get far." But none of them saw the faint movement beneath the wreckage, a burned, bleeding hand clutching a piece of twisted steel. Mason Hale was still alive. Barely, but alive. And somewhere, through the pain, he smiled through gritted teeth. "They'll never stop chasing me," he whispered, "so I'll stop running." Above him, the council gunship rose back into the clouds, unaware that the storm they had started was far from over. The world was a blur of pain and ash. Mason's lungs burned with every breath, his ears ringing with the echo of the explosion. For a long time, he didn't move. The wreck of the cargo hauler lay twisted around him, smoke curling into the dawn sky, metal still glowing red from the blast. He should have been dead. By all logic, he should have been nothing but dust and memory. But the human body, especially one trained for war, was a stubborn thing. Mason Hale had always been too hard to kill. He dragged himself from the rubble, coughing up black dust. Blood ran down his arm, but his eyes were clear, cold and focused. He looked to the east toward the shimmering cliffs. That's where Iliara would run. That's where he needed to go. He picked up a fallen rifle, cracked, half-melted, but usable. Then he limped forward, each step heavier than the last. Above him, the council gunship was already a distant speck. They thought he was gone. That mistake would cost them. By midday, Iliara was half running, half carrying the smallest child as the others stumbled behind her. The cliffs were close now, tall silver walls that cut through the horizon like ancient blades. The wind howled through the narrow paths, scattering sand and light. The children were exhausted, but she didn't stop. Her heart ached, but her mind refused to believe Mason was gone. She could still feel the echo of his presence, that unshakable force that had shielded them again and again. Then a voice echoed across the wind. "Iliara." She froze. The children turned. From the far ridge, a massive figure was moving toward them, limping, smoking but alive. Mason. His armor was cracked. His jacket burned away, but his eyes burned brighter than ever. When he reached them, Rin ran forward and hugged his leg, crying. Iliara stared, speechless. "You how?" "Don't know," Mason said with a dry grin. "Guess I didn't fit in the grave they dug for me." But his humor faded fast. He glanced at the horizon. The black dots of ships were returning, 2, maybe 3. The council had realized their mistake. "They're coming," he said. "We've got minutes." Iliara's voice trembled. "We can't outrun them." Mason's eyes narrowed. "We don't run." He scanned the cliffs, jagged formations with narrow tunnels carved by wind and rain. He pointed toward one. "Get the kids inside that cave now." "What about you?" "I'll keep them busy." "Mason, you can't." He gave her a small, tired smile. "You told me to stop running. Remember?" For a heartbeat, she wanted to argue. Then she saw the fire in his eyes, that same impossible strength that had frightened her when they first met and saved her again and again. She nodded. "Don't die this time," he laughed softly. "I'll try not to make it a habit." As Iliara guided the children into the cave, the first gunship roared overhead. Plasma bolts lit up the sky, tearing through the cliffs. Mason rolled behind a boulder, returning fire. The rifle overheated fast, but he kept firing, every shot precise. When the weapon finally failed, he didn't stop. He grabbed a fallen drone, ripped out its core, and rewired it with one of the soldiers' grenades. Seconds later, the drone launched back into the air and exploded against the gunship's wing. The blast tore through its engine, sending it spiraling into the cliffs. The second gunship descended lower, soldiers dropping out in sleek armor. Mason ran straight toward them, his body screaming in protest. Plasma bolts scorched the ground around him. He picked up a fallen staff and swung it with brutal force, shattering a soldier's helmet. Sparks and blood sprayed through the air. The leader raised his weapon. "Surrender, human!" Mason's voice was low, steady. "Not my style." He lunged forward, and one last charge, raw and fearless. He took 3 more down before a blast caught him in the side. He staggered but kept moving, his fists crashing through armor, his voice a ragged roar. By the time the last soldier fell, Mason was on his knees, smoke rising from his wounds. The second gunship was retreating, engines crippled. The sky above was dark with smoke and light. He turned toward the cliffs. Iliara stood there, the children behind her. Tears ran down her face as she ran to him, kneeling beside his battered form. "Mason!" He smiled faintly, blood on his lips. "Told you it'd be a tight squeeze," he whispered. "But I made it in." She caught his hand, holding it tightly. "You can't die here." "I'm not planning to," he said, looking at the rising sun. "But if I do, promise me you'll keep them safe." Eliara pressed her forehead to his. "I promise." Behind them, the first rays of dawn spilled across the cliffs, lighting the world gold. The Council's ships retreated to the distance, beaten and humiliated. Weeks later, stories would spread across Vareth, whispers of a human titan who fought the Council alone, who rose from fire and wreckage to protect children not his own. Some said he died that day. Others swore they saw him again, a tall, scarred figure walking the wastelands with a small alien child on his shoulder. But Eliara knew the truth. In her journal, she wrote one final line: "He came to my door needing a place to stay. But he left us with something far greater, hope."